All of the narratives presented in this account are created for the sole purpose of providing entertainment. I acknowledge that I have caused significant harm to my husband's employment and created considerable difficulties for him at work. I accept full responsibility for my actions and recognize that this was a grave error in judgment. I engaged in infidelity with another individual, succumbing to persistent temptation. While it is commonly held that finding a wife is a blessing, I fear that I have not been a positive addition to my husband's life. I am convinced that he harbors strong resentment towards me and that he may even hold negative feelings towards me. Such an assessment would be an understatement. I am unable to contemplate confronting my parents at this juncture. What could I possibly reveal to them? I have engaged in infidelity with the potential to jeopardize my husband's career and livelihood. It is inconceivable that my parents would ever accept me back in such circumstances. My husband did not merely seek retribution, he utterly devastated me emotionally and ensured that I regretted my infidelity. He did not allow me any leeway or leniency, leaving no avenue unexplored. It is only now, with the benefit of hindsight, that I am fully aware of the extent of the suffering I have endured. It is difficult to comprehend the extent of the pain I am experiencing, but I am forced to acknowledge that it is a direct consequence of the significant missteps I have made. I am 24 years of age. I am a 24-year-old entrepreneur who has been married to Leonard for 2 years. We dated for 2 years before getting married. I met Leonard when I was 20, and he is considerably older, at 27. He works as a banker and is exceptionally intelligent and diligent in his job. I am inclined to boast about his work. This is why the repercussions of my actions are so severe at this moment in time. I have come to recognize that infidelity is the most significant misstep I have ever made. I did not cheat on Leonard inadvertently. I would be untruthful if I said it was an unintentional occurrence. I am fully aware of the sequence of events that led to this outcome, and this knowledge fills me with self. I am currently experiencing feelings of disgust. It is often the case that individuals engage in actions they subsequently regret. I am no exception to this rule. Consequently, I have decided to share the details of this significant mistake with the wider public. Throughout the 2 years of my marriage to Leonard, we have remained true to ourselves. We have never permitted our work to interfere with our relationship. We have always supported each other. Despite the fact that I had never met Leonard's boss until a few months ago, and despite visiting his workplace on a couple of occasions, he never introduced me to anyone there. It is likely that I am not the only individual who is unfamiliar with everyone at their spouse's workplace. 7 months ago, Leonard received an invitation to his bank's year-end party. I was invited to the end of party and asked to be Leonard's +1. I accepted the invitation with enthusiasm, eager to support him in any way I could. At the time, I was unaware that this seemingly innocuous event would ultimately lead to significant challenges in my marriage. Leonard had even purchased a dress and shoes for me to wear to the occasion. The color theme of the party was wine, and I did not possess any attire in that hue. My sister, an emerging makeup artist, assisted me with my makeup that night. I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge her contributions, yet I am reluctant to reveal her identity. When Leonard and I arrived at the party, it was an overwhelming experience. I had not anticipated the end-of-year party, hosted by a bank, was as lavish as the one we had previously attended. The atmosphere was pleasant, and Leonard expressed a desire to introduce me properly to his colleagues. Prior to this, I had only occasionally visited his workplace, greeting anyone I happened to encounter. I was eager to meet his colleagues, as Leonard had shared so much about them. He introduced me to his friends first, and they were friendly and welcoming. Many of them praised my husband's intelligence, and I felt like a proud wife because they were absolutely right. Before Leonard could introduce me, however, subsequently, Leonard's superior excused himself to attend to another matter, affording Leonard and I the opportunity to sample cocktails and enjoy the culinary offerings. I was so engrossed in the experience that I momentarily forgot about the individual my husband had wanted me to meet. However, later in the evening, Leonard's superior approached us to express his apologies for being unable to converse with us earlier. We were not displeased by this turn of events. Before proceeding, it is important to note that my husband's superior is not one of the bank's owners. He is the head of the department where my husband works. His name is Raphael, and he is 30 years old. When my husband introduced us, I did not attach any significance to it. I did not devote much attention to him. However, I did observe that he held my hand for a longer period than usual. This was the only unusual occurrence. He did not remain with us for an extended period before departing. My husband frequently discussed his colleagues, yet he never boasted about his superior. Therefore, I assumed that they did not have a close relationship outside of work. We continued to enjoy the evening, and I did not see Raphael again. In fact, I even forgot that I had met him at the party. That party turned out to be insignificant, and that is not an exaggeration. Nothing remarkable occurred. The true drama of the evening unfolded several weeks after the initial encounter at the party. Upon returning home, Leonard and I discussed the events that had transpired. Our typical post-event routine was observed days after the event. I had forgotten about the meeting and the party itself. Life resumed its usual course, and I dedicated my attention to my business endeavors as an entrepreneur. I am always eager to explore new business ideas and find satisfaction in earning money and engaging in productive activities. One of my most significant business ventures is co-owning a salon with my best friend. One day, I was the proprietor of a salon when an unanticipated visitor arrived. As you may have surmised, the visitor was Raphael. Initially, I was unaware of his presence. I was attending to a customer at the time, and my attention was otherwise engaged. However, my associate approached me and she informed me that we had a customer who claimed to know me. I was intrigued and decided to ascertain the identity of the individual in question. To my astonishment, I observed Raphael, my husband's superior, standing in the presence of the young lady. I was taken aback and required a moment to process the information, as it was not immediately evident how Raphael could be associated with the customer. He reintroduced himself and inquired as to whether I recalled him. I confirmed that I did, and then requested a moment of his time. I was unsure how to react, as it felt awkward to interact with my husband's boss without him being present. The situation was even more uncomfortable in light of the fact that we had only met once before, when he took me aside for a conversation. During this, he explained that someone had recommended my salon to him. I was perplexed as to how he had suddenly received such a recommendation and how he knew that I was the owner. My curiosity got the better of me, and I inquired about the individual who had directed him to my salon. Simply stated that he had heard about it from my husband, who often spoke of my ownership of the salon. To be frank, the entire conversation felt somewhat awkward because I was unsure of how to address the situation with Raphael. Following our somewhat awkward conversation and his emphasis on the importance of business, he informed me that the young lady accompanying him was his niece and that she needed to have her hair done. He explained that he had been searching for a salon where he knew someone, ensuring that his niece would stay and get her hair done. He stated that she had a tendency to be rebellious and to run away when left alone at places. This is why he chose to bring her to my salon, where I owned a space, upon discovering that I owned one. While I found his explanation somewhat unusual, I saw no issue with looking after a teenager and agreed to ensure she stayed until he returned to pick her up after work. This was the arrangement we settled on before he departed. My best friend attended to his niece's hair while I resumed working on the customer I had been serving earlier. Just 4 hours later, he returned to collect his niece, expressing gratitude. I found his gratitude somewhat unexpected, given that allowing someone to stay at the salon for that duration was a common occurrence. Nevertheless, I accepted his thanks and downplayed the situation as a mere coincidence. I did not want to dwell on it because it seemed insignificant. My best friend and I even felt pleased that our salon was gaining popularity. I was unaware that what I perceived as a coincidence was in fact far from coincidental. Upon returning home that day, I contemplated whether to share the incident with my husband. It did not seem like a significant matter, given that the salon had a constant influx of customers, prompting me to consider whether it would be beneficial to inform my husband. After some deliberation, I concluded that it might be advantageous to do so, particularly given that it would allow him to express his gratitude to his superior. I was motivated to share the incident with my husband in order to express my gratitude for his patronage. However, my husband did not view the matter as particularly significant. He explained that he had mentioned my ownership of the salon on numerous occasions at work, suggesting that this might have prompted his superior to become a customer. He agreed to convey my gratitude on my behalf, and that was the end of the matter. Life continued, and I resumed my focus on the business. 2 weeks later, Raphael paid me another unexpected visit, accompanied by his niece once more. This time, he expressed his intention to have her hair washed. I thanked him for returning and proceeded to wash his niece's hair as requested. Unlike the previous visit, he stayed until the hair washing was completed. I did not anticipate him remaining throughout the entire process, assuming he had to go to work. I was curious, but I refrained from asking, respecting his privacy and maintaining a formal demeanor. Given Raphael's position as my husband's superior, I declined to accept any form of remuneration for the hair wash, given that his niece's hair was not visibly dirty and had not required significant effort on my part. I expressed my gratitude for his visit and offered to assist his niece by braiding her hair into 2 sections. Initially, he was reluctant to accept my offer, stating that business should be conducted in a professional manner. I conducted it professionally and without any discounts. I insisted that I was simply helping because her hair hadn't needed much attention. Eventually, he agreed to my gesture and left with his niece. Later, my best friend sat me down and shared her suspicion that Raphael might have been seeking an excuse to visit me. Initially, I dismissed her comments as inappropriate and even felt foolish, as I now recount. It is curious that I initially found her remarks to be both awkward and improper, yet I ended up contradicting my own stance. Initially, my best friend approached the topic in a humorous manner, not taking it too seriously. When I returned home that day, I chose not to share the encounter with my husband, as I feared that if my best friend made light of the situation and suggested that Raphael might be visiting, I was concerned that my husband might entertain similar thoughts if he saw me and used his niece as an excuse. I therefore decided to avoid planting unnecessary doubts in his mind and kept the information to myself. After that day, I did not come across Raphael for nearly a month. In fact, I even forgot about my best friend's comments. However, when Raphael unexpectedly showed up at the salon again, I was forced to confront the issue. I began to comprehend the implications of my best friend's remarks on that particular day. Raphael arrived without his niece and specifically requested to see me. Initially, I claimed to be preoccupied with work due to the numerous customers in the salon. I believed this would be an appropriate excuse to decline his request, as I felt uneasy about engaging in a private conversation. I informed him that I was inundated with work and unable to spare the time. I was surprised when he offered to wait until I was less busy. His willingness to wait caught me off guard because I hadn't expected him to be so patient. I had assumed he must be busy with his own work and wouldn't have time to spare. However, this was not the case. He had no issues waiting. I decided to deliberately prolong my interactions with other customers, testing whether he would eventually become impatient and leave. I considered leaving, but he remained at the salon until I had finished attending to every customer's hair. My best friend urged me to make a decision, affirming her previous suspicions. She cautioned me to tread carefully, as she sensed that he had ulterior motives. Her words validated the apprehension I had been feeling, confirming that something peculiar was indeed transpiring. I eventually approached him and inquired as to the purpose of his visit to the salon. He was aware of my unease and the awkwardness of my question. He apologized for his abrupt visit to my workplace but insisted that it was of great importance. I am unable to convey the level of discomfort and shock I experienced as he stood before me engaging in conversation. My best friend had already sowed the seeds of I was uncertain as to the nature of his intentions and realized that whatever was transpiring in his thoughts could not be benign. He confessed that he could not stop thinking about me since the party at which my husband had introduced us. He admitted to actively seeking ways to encounter me again, which led him to inquire until he discovered the location of my salon. As he began talking, I attempted to cut the conversation short. I feigned disinterest and attempted to give him the opportunity to correct any misunderstanding. However, he remained steadfast in his assertions, displaying unwavering confidence in his words. I felt profoundly uneasy and was unsure how to respond. This marked the first instance since my marriage that another man had spoken to me in such a manner, and the fact that it was my husband's boss made it particularly disconcerting. He exacerbated my discomfort. I articulated my disapproval, stating that his conduct was inappropriate. I informed him that I intended to ignore his comments and pretend that he had never visited the salon that day, as I did not want to disrespect my husband. Unfortunately, despite my objection, Raphael made no effort to requested his departure once more, but he declined. I finally compelled him to leave by threatening to contact my husband. He departed promptly, albeit not before leaving me his business card. Despite the surprising turn of events and the surreal nature of the situation, I was aware that there could be no positive outcome from entertaining Raphael's infatuation. Driven by a desire to use me for his own amusement, I had watched countless movies depicting such situations and was determined not to become a victim. Therefore, it is particularly distressing that I ultimately succumbed despite my efforts to resist. I find it challenging to recount my actions when I returned home that day. I am aware that I will likely face judgment and harsh criticism, and I believe I deserve censure for my decision not to divulge what occurred at the salon to Leonard. My decision was primarily based on my recognition that disclosing this incident would arouse his suspicions. I regarded it as profoundly embarrassing and awkward, and I didn't want it to create a hostile work environment. At that moment, I realized that Raphael was well aware that I wouldn't disclose his actions to Leonard. Leonard, in his capacity as Raphael's superior at work, was aware that I would endeavor to safeguard Leonard's work environment. This understanding may have contributed to Raphael's confidence in maintaining a concise discourse. Following Raphael's revelation of his intentions, I will present a more succinct account of events. Raphael became a regular visitor to the salon, attending weekly with remarkable consistency, even in the presence of my closest friend. I observed this pattern and advised her to discuss it with Leonard. However, I chose to remain silent, perhaps secretly enjoying his frequent visits. This fact fills me with shame. I opted not to confide in Leonard and continued to entertain these visits, feigning ignorance of the situation despite repeated warnings from my best friend. I stubbornly ignored her advice. Raphael did not just visit for the sake of it. He consistently brought gifts and various items with him, though the reason for this remains unclear. Less than a month after his visits began, I initiated conversations with him, as I also worked weekends at the salon. Raphael would visit me during his non-work hours, and we engaged in lengthy discussions about a range of topics. I was uncertain about my motivations at the time, but I cannot deny that I was actively engaging with him in multiple ways. Several weeks into his visits, he began inviting me to his house, and I accepted. I was invited to his house and, despite my misgivings, I accepted. I am ashamed of my actions and find it difficult to comprehend how I could have behaved in such a way. It was during one of these visits to Raphael's house that things escalated and I became aware that I was engaging in an affair. I promptly sought solace in the knowledge that I had not been unfaithful to my husband. However, upon returning home, I was overcome with a sense of revulsion, which prompted me to take multiple showers. In that moment, I was acutely aware that I had committed an unforgivable act. My actions were inexcusable, particularly given that my husband had his own boss. I fully accepted that I faced the consequences of my actions following the incident at Raphael's house. I abstained from visiting the salon for nearly a month, blocked his number, and took every measure to avoid any contact with him. I even refrained from allowing my husband to touch me for days due to overwhelming guilt. It was a challenging period, but I acknowledged that I had brought it upon myself. The guilt I experienced was just the beginning, and the revenge my husband ultimately sought was brutal. I had anticipated that my marriage would be a source of unhappiness, yet I was surprised to discover that it was, in fact, a wonderful relationship. Despite this, I found myself questioning my actions. I was unable to identify the specific reason that led me down this path. I initially resisted, but eventually gave in. This occurred even after my partner began visiting the salon regularly. At the time, I believed it was a temporary diversion, a way to occupy my time. However, I later realized that it was merely an excuse that led me to cheat on my husband. I gradually gave in without even realizing it. I pretended that it was a passing fancy, a form of self. It was a source of amusement to me initially, but it was ultimately a deception. I am unable to continue to deceive myself and pretend that I did not understand where it would lead. I was not naive, I was aware that he wanted something from me. I foolishly gave in, jeopardizing my marriage, self-respect and loyalty in the process. Even as I experienced feelings of self-guilt and self-pity, I was unable to consider the possibility that my husband was fully aware of the situation. It is regrettable that I did not consider the possibility that my husband was aware of the situation. I was unaware that he was aware of my thoughts and actions. I believed that I was keeping him in the dark, assuming that he would only discover the truth when I was ready to confess. If someone were to ask whether I had planned to confess to my husband, I would admit that it was not a consideration for me. I was aware that the truth would eventually emerge, but I lacked the courage to be entirely candid. Consequently, I believed that I deserved the consequences of my actions. I lied to my husband's face, pretending that everything was normal. Furthermore, my husband was aware of the truth and discovered that I had been unfaithful to him with his boss. If you are curious about how he discovered this and how I found out, I will explain. As previously stated, my husband is an exceptionally intelligent individual. This assertion is entirely accurate. He possesses keen intelligence and a high level of awareness of his surroundings, rendering it impossible to hide anything from him. He notices even the tiniest details, which enabled him to discern that something was amiss exactly 2 months ago. I was utterly shocked when Leonard did something. Leonard is a banker, which made it logical for me to place my financial affairs in his hands. He also oversees my tax affairs and handles all other financial matters. Due to his profession, he is responsible for managing every aspect of my finances. When I initially married him, I was somewhat careless with my spending. It was not that I had a substantial income, it was merely average. Prior to marrying my husband, I had a tendency to spend impulsively, purchasing items that caught my attention. However, following our marriage, he began imparting financial wisdom and guidance, which included advice on becoming a more responsible entrepreneur. His guidance proved invaluable, leading me to begin entrusting him with the majority of my tax and savings matters. While some may view this decision as unwise, there were instances when I chose to. I entrusted my money to him in case I felt tempted to spend it recklessly. I never had concerns because he had his own money. Whenever I genuinely needed it, he would return my money. On occasion, he would even reward me with extra funds. When I managed to save a substantial amount, I never imagined that the mutual trust we shared would ultimately lead to my loss. Then, one day, I was hit with an enormous debit. As previously stated, I am the proprietor of my own business, and a considerable proportion of my income is deposited in a financial institution. My husband is aware of my personal identification number, PIN, as previously mentioned. On occasion, I would transfer funds to him, which would then be deposited into his account on the same day. However, when I discovered that my entire savings had been misappropriated, I was left with virtually no financial resources. This experience left me feeling as though I was staring into an abyss. I was at the salon at the time and I practically dashed out and hurried home. I was already aware of the situation regarding my finances, as only one person knew my PIN and had control over my accounts. This person was my husband. Upon my return home, I discovered that he was not there, so I had to wait for his arrival. When he finally came back, I confronted him about upon discovering the disappearance of my financial resources, I was subjected to another traumatic incident. My husband physically assaulted me, striking me across the face with a forceful slap. The intense anger and fury in his eyes sent shivers down my spine, and I can still vividly recall the image of his anger. He shook his head ever so slightly and uttered words that cut through me like a knife, stating that marrying me had been the worst decision of his life. The decision he had made in that moment was the most significant one of his life. The intensity of the emotion I observed in his eyes was difficult to convey in words. Leonard regarded me with a gaze that conveyed utter disgust. He accused me of being a fool and labeled me as loose and stupid. I was rendered speechless by the sheer impact of his words. I was unable to respond in any meaningful way. My shock rendered me unable to speak. I knew there was nothing I could say that would make any sense in that moment. He proceeded to reveal that he had been aware of my infidelity for some time. Leonard had been aware of my infidelity for some time. He berated me for thinking I could deceive him and get away with it. The level of anger I witnessed in Leonard that day was completely unfamiliar to me. I had never seen him so furious and I had never imagined he could become so upset. I was equally astonished that he had discovered my affair. He explained how he had discovered it. Leonard had suspected something was amiss when I mentioned that his boss had visited my salon. Leonard had a strained relationship with his boss, so when he heard that his boss had been to my salon, he grew suspicious. He had secretly hired someone to keep tabs on me, and this person had been providing him with reports of my activities. This included the day I followed Raphael to his house. Leonard had been aware of it. I was astonished and asked him why he had not confronted me earlier. He admitted that he had preferred to let me remain in the dark, intending to exact his revenge. I questioned why he had not intervened before Raphael, and I took our relationship to the next level. Leonard replied that he was indifferent to my actions and wanted to know if I would remain loyal to him. He then made a significant announcement, declaring that all the money I had saved with him and the funds in his bank were now his. I was incredulous. Leonard remained unwavering even as I pleaded with him. I then realized that my best friend also had her money in his bank and that she would soon come to claim it. The world seemed to have come to a standstill, and I found myself in the midst of chaos. Before I could gather my thoughts, Leonard placed the divorce papers were placed on the table in front of me. It was evident that Leonard had already signed them. I was rendered helpless by the realization of the consequences of my actions. I implored Leonard to forgive me and expressed profound remorse for everything I had done to hurt him. However, Leonard made it clear that he would never grant me the satisfaction of forgiveness. Adding insult to injury, he demanded that I was instructed to vacate the house immediately. I was without accommodation and experiencing financial difficulties, yet he displayed no concern despite having endured a tumultuous day. I mustered the courage to inquire about the situation at his workplace. Leonard looked me in the eyes and stated that he would not take any action. He believed I was not worth jeopardizing his job. However, I suspected he might be bluffing, knowing he would likely take some form of action. I was concerned about the potential impact on his career, given that men often have a strong sense of pride and are reluctant to let such matters slide. I experienced a profound sense of guilt, and the possibility of him losing his job because of me weighed heavily on me. Leonard made it unambiguously clear that I had been a foolish mistake. These were his final words before he directed me to leave the house. 2 months have now passed, and I find myself consumed by self-reflection. It is noteworthy that Raphael did not attempt to contact me, despite the likelihood that he had heard about the incident. Rumors spread rapidly, and it is probable that the entire city is aware of the truth. I came to realize that I had unwittingly become a pawn in his game. He had workplace issues with my husband and decided I had been naive enough to fall into the trap and end up as collateral damage. I eventually signed the divorce papers, and our divorce proceedings are still ongoing. It is unclear how I will survive the upcoming weeks, but I suppose I will endure, just as I have done thus far. I have thus far managed to survive these past 2 months, but I am currently at a loss as to what to do next. My guilt is consuming me. I have a court hearing in a few minutes, so I will conclude this update here. I will provide another update once the divorce is finalized. I am now officially divorced, which is a challenging situation. It is difficult to comprehend how I permitted my marriage to endure for a mere 3 years. I am currently experiencing a profound sense of despair. I have been inundated with comments on Reddit, which were as harsh as I had anticipated. However, I had not anticipated anything different. Nevertheless, you have lived up to my expectations. I am grateful for the comments because they have encouraged me to engage in self-reflection and personal growth, despite the challenges I have faced. The divorce proceedings were concluded recently, and given that we had no children together, the process was relatively straightforward. I did receive alimony, although it was reduced to the minimum amount. I may appear to be seeking excessive compensation, but I am merely trying to secure my financial stability. However, I had no alternative but to accept this outcome. Leonard had appropriated every penny that was rightfully mine. As a result, I am now financially constrained and owe a considerable sum of money to my best friend. I attempted to pursue legal action but, lacking the necessary funds for a lawyer, my parents advised me to abandon the matter. My parents are understandably distressed by this turn of events. Furthermore, I am unable to communicate with my parents, who have become increasingly distant. My best friend is the only person who has demonstrated any understanding of my situation. She frequently reminds me of her financial situation and is understandably angry with me, but she has been kind enough to allow me to stay with her. I recently learned that there was quite a bit of drama at Leonard's workplace. It would appear that Leonard had already engaged in a dispute with his superior, given that the latter does not hold a direct ownership stake in the bank and is merely the head of Leonard's department. It is evident that Leonard's superior could not have undermined Leonard's career, as I had feared. Nevertheless, Leonard remains employed at the bank, which only serves to intensify my sense of self. It is unfortunate that Leonard and his superior are striving to maintain a cordial professional relationship at work, despite the lack of tangible progress. Conversely, I am bearing the brunt of the consequences of the decision made by Raphael and myself. The distinction between our respective situations is that Raphael is not directly affected by the resulting turmoil. I am unable to articulate the extent of my self-loathing. I currently experience a profound sense of disdain and animosity, yet I believe I would be a narcissist if I did not feel remorse. I would despise myself if I did not feel any regret for my actions. Currently, I am focusing on my business endeavors to repay my closest associate. I will conclude this update by stating that these are the key developments in my life. I am grateful that I embarked on this journey and chose to share my story. I appreciate your attention and engagement.